Mohenjo-daro, the impossible Inferno. The year is roughly 2000 BCE. You are walking the streets of the most advanced city on the planet. Running water, sewage systems, grid-planned roads, a population of 40,000 people at a time when most of humanity is still huddled in mud huts. And then something ends it. Not slowly, not through starvation or plague or slow abandonment. Something ends it with heat so extreme that the streets themselves turn to glass. When British archaeologist Ernest Mackay excavated Mohenjo-daro in the 1920s, he found sections of pavement, brick, and clay fused into a crystalline material requiring sustained temperatures between 1400 and 1600 degrees Celsius. No open fire achieves that. No burning building, no collapsed roof, no funeral pyre comes close without sealed chambers and forced air. Yet the vitrified zones cover entire street-level areas across multiple city blocks. At least 44 human skeletons were found scattered flat in the roads, not buried, not posed, not fleeing toward an exit. Just stopped. Researcher A. Gorbovsky documented in his 1966 study that several of those skeletons show bone decay inconsistent with conventional fire exposure. The city's administrative seals, grain stores, and craft workshops were fully operational immediately before the destruction layer. There was no gradual decline. Whatever came, came fast. Mainstream archaeologists point to flooding, ecological collapse, and possible invasion as the end of the Indus Valley civilization. The vitrified sections, they argue, are localized kiln accidents. But kiln accidents do not fuse street-level pavement across multiple blocks, and the same vitrification appears at Harappa, the sister city hundreds of kilometers to the north. Two cities, same result. Nobody has a clean answer for what heat source achieves 1600 degrees across open urban surfaces in 2000 BCE. The question isn't whether Mohenjo-daro burned, it's what could possibly have burned it that way. From the scorched plains of Pakistan, we cross the world to the northern edge of Europe, where over 80 hilltops tell the exact same story in glass. The vitrified forts of Scotland. You are standing on a Scottish hilltop in the Iron Age. Your people have built a fortress from stone and timber, and then someone lights a fire so impossibly hot that the stone walls melt together into a single fused mass. Here is the part that should stop you cold. The wall is now stronger than anything you could have built by hand, which forces the question, was this destruction or was this construction? Over 80 confirmed hill forts across Scotland have walls fused into a slag-like vitrified material, catalogued first by archaeologist V. Gordon Childe in the 1930s. Modern petrological analysis conducted by Ian Ralston at the University of Edinburgh confirmed what the numbers demand. Sustained temperatures of 1050 to 1200 degrees Celsius were required to produce these results. The problem is that wood fires in open air burn at 600 to 900 degrees maximum. To reach vitrification temperatures inside a timber-laced stone wall, you would need enormous quantities of precisely arranged fuel and directed forced airflow. Experimental attempts to replicate the process in the 1930s, led by Childe himself, failed to reach the required temperature without artificial assistance. More troubling still, several of the forts show vitrification only on their interior wall faces, consistent with deliberate internal firing, not external attack. And multiple sites show continued habitation directly above the fused layer. The people who lived there kept living there. Mainstream scholars argue that attacking enemies burned the timber-laced walls with exceptional conditions, dense wood, wind, confined space, creating a natural furnace. But if enemies burned these walls to destroy them, why are the walls structurally superior after the fire? Some researchers have asked whether these forts represent a sophisticated Iron Age construction technique, controlled burning used to fuse stone into a single rigid ceramic mass. If so, this is pyrotechnical knowledge with no parallel in the Iron Age record anywhere else on Earth. From walls that fire made indestructible, we go deeper, to a site where the builders didn't just survive the fire, they buried themselves beneath it. Göbekli Tepe, the temple that buried itself. The year is 8000 BCE. The world's oldest known temple has stood on this hilltop for over 1600 years. Its T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing 20 tons and standing 6 meters high, are carved with foxes, vultures, scorpions, and abstract symbols we still cannot fully read. And now the people who built all of this are filling it in, burying their own sacred site under thousands of tons of rubble and soil. Deliberately, completely, as if they are hiding something from what is coming. Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute discovered Göbekli Tepe in 1994. Radiocarbon dating places its construction beginning at 9600 BCE, predating Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the Great Pyramid by 7,000. The deliberate burial required an estimated 300 to 500 cubic meters of fill material per enclosure, a labor investment nearly equal to the original construction. Geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University has argued, based on weathering patterns and a dark burned sediment layer at the base of the fill, that the burial may have been a direct response to a catastrophic surface event, possibly a solar outburst or cosmic airburst consistent with the proposed Younger Dryas impact horizon around 12,800 years ago. In 2017, Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis of the University of Edinburgh published analysis of Pillar 43, the so-called vulture stone, arguing it encodes a star map recording an astronomical catastrophe dated to approximately 10,950 BCE. The carved reliefs were not damaged before burial. They were carefully preserved as if intended to be found again. Mainstream archaeologists describe the burial as ritual decommissioning, a respectful cultural closure, but ritual abandonment does not explain the burned sediment layer beneath the fill. Was Göbekli Tepe entombed because its builders watched something ignite the sky and understood that the only way to save what they had built was to hide it underground before the surface world became uninhabitable? The burning was not of the temple. It may have been of everything around it. From a temple buried to survive the fire, we travel 3,500 years forward and westward, to a palace where fire did the exact opposite of what it was supposed to do. The Palace of Knossos, fire that preserved. The palace is burning. Cedar roof beams are collapsing. The storage magazines are an inferno. Frescoed walls are cracking in the heat. And yet, when archaeologists arrive 3,300 years later, they find the most complete administrative archive of the ancient Aegean world, perfectly legible, perfectly intact, because the fire that should have obliterated everything instead baked it into permanence. Sir Arthur Evans began excavating Knossos in 1900. What his team recovered from the destruction layer, dated to approximately 1375 BCE, was staggering. Over 3,000 linear B clay tablets, the earliest readable European writing, preserved only because the palace fire reached temperatures high enough to permanently harden the unfired clay. Without that burning, those tablets would have dissolved within a generation. Evans documented destruction layers showing the cedar columns burned completely, leaving only carbonized shadows in the stone. Yet gypsum floor surfaces immediately beneath the Inferno survived intact, and ceramic analysis of the storage magazines shows fire temperatures reaching 850 to 950 degrees Celsius. hot enough to fire ceramics, but unevenly distributed enough that the storage vessels within survived unmelted. The palace had been destroyed and rebuilt at minimum twice before this final burning, at approximately 1700 BCE and again at 1450 BCE, each time on the exact same footprint. Michael Ventress's 1952 decipherment revealed the tablets were mundane inventory records, lists of sheep, grain, bronze, weapons, the most ordinary administrative documents imaginable, preserved for 3 millennia entirely by accident. Mainstream historians attribute the final destruction to Mycenaean invasion or internal revolt. But the repeated rebuilding of Knossos on the same footprint across 4 centuries of catastrophic loss suggests something about this specific location compelled people to return regardless of what had been lost. Some researchers have asked whether fire at Knossos was not only catastrophe, but ceremony, if the tablets weren't placed in the fire's path accidentally, but because someone understood exactly what the heat would do to clay. Knossos burned, and its records survived. But the next site didn't just survive fire, it used fire as its fundamental building material for 1,400 consecutive years. Çatalhöyük, the city that ate its own fires. Every house in this city will burn. That is not a tragedy. That is the plan. The year is 7000 BCE, and the people of Çatalhöyük have organized their entire civilization around a principle no modern architect would accept. When a home completes its life, you burn it to the ground, compress the ash flat, and build the new house directly on the bones of the old one. For 1,400 years, without a single interruption in the archaeological record, they did exactly this. First excavated by James Mellart in 1961 and studied in depth by Ian Hodder of Stanford University from 1993 onward, Çatalhöyük today is an 18-meter-high mound composed almost entirely of compressed ash and fired brick debris across roughly 18 sequential building levels. The site is estimated to have housed between 5,000 and 8,000 people at its peak, one of the largest Neolithic settlements on Earth. The burning was not random. Pre-burning analysis shows interior plasters were sometimes carefully removed before firing, which means the fire was managed, staged, and controlled. Fired mud brick achieves a compressive strength approximately 3 to 5 times greater than sun-dried brick, a structural improvement the inhabitants demonstrably understood and exploited across every level of occupation. Human burials were placed beneath house floors before burning, literally incorporating the dead into the foundation material of the next generation's home. Auroch skulls were embedded in the walls before each fire, fused permanently into the structure by the heat, a practice consistent across all 18 levels. Hodder's team describes this as ritual house closure, a spiritual death and rebirth ceremony tied to the domestic life cycle. That interpretation is reasonable. But 1,400 years of identical behavior producing a structurally superior material as a consistent byproduct suggests these people had independently discovered something about fired architecture that our textbooks credit to much later civilizations. Was the ceremony and the engineering the same act? Spiritual practice encoding material science to ensure it was never forgotten? We may never fully know. What we know is that it worked. From Anatolia's ritual pyres, we cross the Mediterranean, to a burning so famous it entered mythology, yet whose true history is far stranger than the legend. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus burned on the night of Alexander. The night is the 21st of July, 356 BCE. On one side of the ancient world, a woman gives birth to a boy who will conquer everything he touches. On the other side, a man named Herostratus walks into the most magnificent building on earth and sets it on fire. Ancient historians swore the timing was not coincidence. The goddess was absent, they said, attending the birth of Alexander. The temple burned because she looked away. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus had a marble platform measuring 115 by 55 meters, larger than a modern football field, supporting 127 Ionic columns, each standing 18 meters high. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Its foundation, documented by later excavations led by John Turtle Wood for the British Museum beginning in 1869, was constructed with alternating layers of charcoal and charred wood deliberately engineered to absorb seismic shocks. Fire literally built into the architecture's bones from the beginning. A column gifted by King Croesus of Lydia survived the 356 BCE burning and is today housed in the British Museum, its dedicatory inscription intact. Herostratus was condemned to death and subjected to damnatio memoriae, the ancient world's first documented formal attempt to erase a person's name from history. The Ephesian authorities explicitly forbade anyone from ever speaking or writing his name. Strabo wrote it down anyway, which is why we know it. The temple was rebuilt larger, elevated 2 meters higher than the original, and stood for another 600 years before the Goths burned it in 262 CE. It was effectively destroyed a third time by a Christian mob around 401 CE. 3 destruction events across 750 years. Each time, the platform survived. Mainstream scholars attribute the repeated rebuilding to the Artemis cult's economic and religious importance to Ephesus. But no other wonder was rebuilt once, let alone twice, on the same footprint. Something about this site seemed to refuse erasure. Was the charcoal foundation not a coincidence of materials, but a design principle that made this ground indestructible? A temple that fire could not permanently claim. But the next site wasn't attacked by a lone arsonist or a foreign army. It was burned from within, by its own people, with surgical, deliberate precision. Teotihuacan, the city that burned its own elite. The year is approximately 550 CE. The largest city in the Western Hemisphere has stood for 5 centuries. The Pyramid of the Sun has been here longer than Rome has been Christian. Its population of 125,000 to 200,000 people makes it the 6th largest city on Earth. And then, in what the archaeological record suggests was a single coordinated event, the city's palaces, its administrative compounds, its priestly residences, and only those, are systematically put to the torch. The homes of ordinary people are untouched. The pyramids are untouched. Only power burns. René Millen of the University of Rochester first mapped this destruction layer during his Teotihuacan mapping project between 1962 and 1974. George Cowgill of Arizona State University later refined both the dating, approximately 550 CE, confirmed through ceramic sequence analysis and radiocarbon dating, and the extraordinary selectivity of the burning. Only structures along the 2.4-kilometer street of the Dead Corridor and surrounding elite compounds show consistent fire damage. The residential barrios, where ordinary workers and craftspeople lived, are largely undisturbed. Burned and smashed cult statues were found scattered across the Ciudadela, suggesting deliberate desecration. The Pyramid of the Sun and Pyramid of the Moon show no fire damage whatsoever, despite being the most visible structures in the city. Coordinating a simultaneous multi-site burning across 20 square kilometers of a 200,000-person city while specifically protecting certain monuments requires planning, communication, and intimate insider knowledge of the city's layout. The mainstream interpretation is an internal revolt. The lower classes overthrowing a theocratic elite that had controlled the city for centuries. That explanation is reasonable. But some researchers have asked whether this precision points to something more deliberate, a structured, ritualistic act of civilizational reset, the ending of a calendrical cycle encoded in fire. Mesoamerican cultures institutionalized the ceremonial burning of time. Was Teotihuacan's destruction not a collapse, but a closing ceremony conducted by its own priests aimed at something only they understood needed to end? From a city that may have burned itself, we travel back 900 years and 10,000 kilometers to a plain in Turkey where the fire came from outside, and what survived should have been the first thing to go. Troy 7a, the sealed ash layer. The year is approximately 1180 BCE. You live in Troy. Something is coming. You can feel it in the silence from the coast, in the faces of the traders who stopped arriving 3 weeks ago. So you take your bronze spearheads, wrap them carefully, and press them into a hollow in your wall. You bury your storage jars upright beneath your floor, packed with grain. You seal everything with the composure of someone following a plan. And then Troy burns. Heinrich Schliemann began excavating Hisarlik in northwestern Turkey in 1871. The specific destruction layer of Troy 7a, the level most associated with the historical Trojan War, was identified and excavated by Carl Blegen of the University of Cincinnati between 1932 and 1938. What Blegen found inside that ash layer is one of the stranger details in Near Eastern archaeology. The destruction band is consistent across the entire city. A uniform stratum of ash, burned brick, and collapsed wall material approximately 60 centimeters deep in places. Yet embedded within and immediately beneath it were storage jars buried upright into house floors, a method of caching Blegen argued represented emergency preparation rather than normal household storage. Bronze weapons were found wrapped and placed in wall foundations, showing zero fire damage despite being centimeters beneath the destruction layer. Human skeletal remains within the ash show unburied individuals who did not escape, suggesting the fire moved faster than at least some residents could respond. Mainstream historians attribute this to military assault, the siege of the Iliad, or a closely related historical conflict. The concealed objects represent emergency caching by residents who knew an attack was imminent. That explanation fits the evidence, but the careful wrapping, the deliberate placement, the methodical composure of the hiding suggests people who were not panicking. They were following a plan. The fire came anyway. Some researchers have quietly asked whether the hidden objects were ever intended to be retrieved at all, or whether the sealing was itself a ritual act, a burial of Troy's material soul before the physical city was surrendered to flame. At Troy, people hid things before the fire came. At the next site, the burning itself has never fully stopped, and what it destroyed became the founding myth of all scholarship. The Library of Alexandria, the fire that never ended. There was never one fire. That is the first thing most accounts leave out. The greatest library in human history, containing, by ancient estimates, between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls, was not destroyed in a single dramatic blaze. It was killed in installments across 7 centuries by a rotating cast of destroyers who may not have finished the job. The chain begins with Julius Caesar. Plutarch's account in the Life of Caesar records that a fire set during the harbor battle of 48 BCE burned a warehouse containing approximately 40,000 scrolls awaiting shipment. Not the main library building itself, which survived. The Serapeum Daughter Library in the southern quarter of the city continued operating for centuries until 391 CE, when the Christian bishop Theophilus ordered its demolition, documented by both Orosius and the philosopher Eunapius. Jean-Yves Empereur of the Centre d'études Alexandrine conducted excavations in Alexandria in the 1990s, recovering architectural elements, column bases, marble flooring, consistent with a major institutional structure in the Bruchaillon quarter, at a depth suggesting deliberate demolition rather than fire collapse. A fourth destruction, attributed to Caliph Omar in 641 CE, and the claim that the scrolls burned for 6 months, is now largely rejected by historians as a later fabrication. What remains hauntingly suggestive are the Oxyrhynchus papyri, over 500,000 fragments of ancient texts recovered from an Egyptian rubbish heap beginning in 1896, including works previously thought destroyed with the library entirely. Mainstream historians now largely agree the library declined through neglect and multiple partial destructions rather than one catastrophic burning. That is the careful, reasonable consensus. But the Oxyrhynchus finds and persistent medieval accounts of scholars consulting Alexandrian texts that shouldn't exist suggest that something was saved, deliberately, repeatedly, carefully saved by someone who understood what was being lost. Was there a systematic program of copying and distributing critical holdings to satellite locations? Are those archives still buried somewhere beneath modern Alexandria? The most terrifying question isn't what burned, it's what was in the scrolls that left no trace, no copy, no citation, no fragment anywhere in the tradition that followed. The Library of Alexandria burned across centuries and may have partially survived, but the final entry on this list burned for 3 consecutive months, and by the time the fire went out, an entire branch of human knowledge had ceased to exist. Nalanda, the fire that burned for 3 months. The year is 1193 CE. The greatest university on Earth has been operating continuously for over 700 years. At its peak, it housed 10,000 students and 2,000 teachers arriving from China, Korea, Japan, Tibet, Mongolia, Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asia. Its library, the Dharmaganja, the Ocean of Gems, fills 3 separate 9-story buildings. Its curriculum spans mathematics, astronomy, medicine, logic, and philosophy in depths that would not be matched in Europe for centuries. And then Bakhtiar Khilji's cavalry arrives. The battle lasts days. The fire, according to the chroniclers, lasts 3 months. The destruction was recorded by the Persian chronicler Minhaj-e-Siraj Juzjani in his Tabakat-e-Nasiri, written around 1260 CE, and corroborated in Tibetan sources including the account of the monk Dharmas Vaman, who visited the ruins in 1235 CE and described smoke still rising from the collapsed library structures. Alexander Cunningham's 1861 excavations for the Archaeological Survey of India confirmed the structural integrity of the monastery's fired brick walls. Several buildings retained standing courses 3 to 4 meters high after 650 years of abandonment. The Nalanda complex at its peak covered approximately 14 hectares, comprising 11 monasteries and 6 brick temples, the product of continuous royal patronage from the Gupta Empire through the Pala dynasty beginning around 427 CE. Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang, who studied at Nalanda in 635 CE, described the library buildings as 9 stories high with windows of latticed stone and book storage rooms filling every level. Modern estimates suggest the Dharmaganja may have held between 3 million and 9 million individual manuscript pages. Mainstream historians attribute the destruction to Khilji's military campaign and the 3-month duration to the sheer scale of combustible material. That is a reasonable explanation, but no library of organic manuscripts sustained structural fire for 90 days inside fired brick buildings in the monsoon climate of Bihar without something unusual about the density, the construction, or the deliberateness of the act. Some researchers have asked whether 90 days reflects not one sustained fire, but a systematic building-by-building erasure, someone taking 3 months to make absolutely certain nothing survived. The fired brick walls of Nalanda stood. The knowledge inside them did not. And the text that Nalanda held, for which no copy has ever been found anywhere in the surviving tradition, are simply gone. These 10 sites do not form a random list of historical accidents. They form a pattern. Fire, again and again, refuses to behave the way it should. It vitrifies streets at temperatures ancient civilizations had no business reaching. It fuses stone walls into something stronger than the original. It buries sacred sites and preserves administrative records and burns for 3 months inside brick buildings and leaves hidden caches sealed beneath ash as though someone expected the world to survive long enough to dig them out. The mainstream explanations, kiln accidents, enemy raids, ritual abandonment, military destruction, are each individually defensible. But taken together, across 12,000 years and 6 continents, the same question keeps surfacing. What did these civilizations understand about fire that we have filed away under coincidence? Most people walk past burned ruins and see endings. You watch this far, which means you see something else. You see the question the ash is still asking. Hit subscribe and tell us in the comments. Which fire on this list do you think was not an accident? Make your case. Fire is supposed to be the end of things. Every site on this list says otherwise. From the glass streets of Mohenjo-daro to the 3-month Inferno at Nalanda, the most important question has never been what burned. It's what survived, and why someone may have needed it gone.